It is Friday, and the day after the 49ers blew a must-win game on Thursday Night Football on the national stage, 12-6 without scoring a single touchdown. Now, mind you, not a single touchdown was scored by either team in this game. It was a defensive showing by both sides. But the 49ers, in a must-win game to keep their slim playoff hopes alive, playing at home, playing against a divisional rival, a game that you needed to win, a game where Dre Greenlaw was making his appearance after being out for 10 months since tearing his Achilles, a game where Nick Bosa comes back after being out for 3 weeks. The 49ers only managed to score 6 points. 6 points for a team that needed to win this game to make the playoffs. 6 points after the offense comes alive against the Bears. 6 points after Kyle Shanahan figured things out and stopped forcing the ball to Deebo Samuel. 6 points after that. And then what happens? After learning something last week against the Bears, he decides to go back to his original playbook and force the ball to Deebo Samuel again. And I think this game was the perfect ending to what's been an atrocious season for the 49ers. So many things went wrong, even though it should have been a game where things should have been celebrated, where it could have been a launching point to get the 49ers into the playoffs and go on a run. Instead, it was the final nail in the coffin. To start off, you knew on the first play of the game, Kyle Shanahan did not learn from his success in the previous week against the Bears. The 49ers that played against the Bears were the 49ers everybody was expecting to see this game on the national stage. Kyle Shanahan called more screens than he had all season. He included George Kittle and Jawan Jennings as the focal point of the offense. George Kittle had over 150 yards receiving last week. And only for this game, on the very first play of the game, to target Deebo Samuel because of the noise he made on social media. Deebo Samuel was the biggest threat to the game outside of DeVondre Campbell, who we'll get to in a bit. But Deebo Samuel tackled his own teammate, Isaac Guerendo, had a false start, had 2 drop passes, one that was for a potential game-winning touchdown, averaged 1.5 yards per carry. That's right, 1.5, had 2 carries for 3 yards, and did absolutely nothing in the air. And the only good thing that he did was on his kick return, where he had a horse collar against him, which put the 49ers at the 50-yard line for a potential Hail Mary. That never ended up happening. Deebo Samuel is Kyle Shanahan's kryptonite. Was he good? Absolutely. Everybody remembers the 21 season where he carried the 49ers on his back. But since that Pro Bowl season, Deebo Samuel has been a mediocre wide receiver. The league has figured him out. And let's be honest, I love Deebo Samuel for what he did for the 49ers, but I think of Bill Walsh when he said it is best to trade a player a year too early rather than a year too late. The 49ers should have traded him last year or even this offseason when they had the opportunity to get a second-round pick. Now they'll be lucky to get a 5th or 6th-round pick because of his bloated salary. So the most likely scenario is he gets released with a post-June 1st designation. And the team will say, because of all that Deebo's done for us, we wanted to give him the right to choose the team that he goes to. But the reality is he's not the future for the team. And just like a running back, he's been beaten up because he's been used as a wide receiver / running back. So his body's just broken down. And he's not the player he once was. And it's unfortunate because I think he's done so many good things for the 49ers. But honestly, we saw it going downhill since he slapped Moody on the sideline, telling him to lock in. I think ever since then, it started going downhill because then you start, chiming in on social media. Then you start not producing on the field. The only player that needed to lock in was Deebo Samuel. And the reality is he's a captain on this team and acted anything but that. And so Deebo Samuel needs to go in the offseason. I think John Lynch needs to protect Kyle from himself, and the only way to do that is to let go of Deebo Samuel. I think what you'll see then is that Kyle was going to figure out a way how to get the ball to his other playmakers. And so let Deebo, I'm assuming Deebo will be fine. He'll probably land in, I could see him landing in Cleveland or in Miami, or even with Baltimore. But the reality is I think his tenure with the 49ers is over. And it should be. It should have been last year. We'll miss him. His great contributions, but he's just not the player he once was. And the 49ers need to see what they have in Ricky Pearsall. They need to see what they have Jacob Cowing. They've already paid Jawan Jennings. They'll probably need to pay him again because of how great of a year he's had. Brandon Ayuk's already locked up for the foreseeable future. And so you need to start looking into a world without Deebo Samuel, and Kyle Shanahan needs to evolve his play calling there. Now, let's move on from Deebo. Let's talk about Dre Greenlaw. Dre Greenlaw, who hadn't played in 10 months, ended up rupturing his Achilles during the Super Bowl while coming onto the field after a kickoff. It should have been a celebration, which it was. He played lights out, 9 tackles in the first half, and then came off because his knee started irritating him, which is expected if you haven't played live football. It's just different. You can do all of the ramp up. You could do all of, any of your physical things off the field, where your physical therapy, and try to simulate it. But there's nothing quite like simulating live tackling in a live NFL game until you're actually in it. And so he did great while he was in there, but he ended up going off to the sideline. Then you had another injury, and then you know what? The 49ers couldn't pull off the game for Dre Greenlaw. Instead, what happened was they crumbled in game because DeVondre Campbell decided to not show up. No, let's take that back. He showed up so he can collect a paycheck, but decided he didn't want to play. Didn't want to play and refused to go in to play after Dre Greenlaw and D. Winters went out. In fact, you had Flanagan Fowles, who had to play both special teams and start because DeVondre Campbell chose not to play. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. One is that should have never happened. You dressed out. You knew your role on this team. You were signed to a 1-year deal. The Packers released you. The 49ers picked you up as insurance until Greenlaw was coming back. You knew what your role was. You knew when Greenlaw came back, he would be the starting linebacker, not you. And yet, here you are throwing a fit, walking off the field saying you don't want to play because you were not the starter. One, you played horrible this year. Your pass defense was absolutely atrocious. You were never quite good at pass defense, but this year you were pretty atrocious. And your run blocking wasn't that great. It got better as the year went on, but your run defense was mediocre at best. And so the fact that you couldn't run sideline to sideline was already a vulnerability. In fact, defenses targeted you because of that. And unless they were running up the middle, you weren't that effective. And so everybody knew that the writing was on the wall, that you weren't the long-term solution. You were a 1-year deal. The 49ers did you a favor. They gave you a decent contract, and you just decided to not play. You decided to not play. Yes, were your feelings hurt? You thought maybe you showed up enough to start? That's fine. But you knew where you weren't going to start during the week. You knew when Greenlaw was activated that you weren't going to do that. So why did you even walk out in the field? You predetermined you were going to walk off the field when they called your number. This became a me before we mentality, which is unacceptable. Unacceptable, and honestly, DeVondre Campbell's career should be over. No NFL team should want that in their locker room, because that says I have a me before we mentality. It says that it's, you know what, unless I'm getting what I want, I could care less what the team wants. I don't care about the team's vision. I don't care about the brotherhood of the linebackers or the defense or the entire team, that the 53 of us made it out of a potential 90 team members that went through training camp. I don't care about any of that. I care about myself and my bag. And if they call my number, I don't care. I collected a paycheck, so I'm going to walk off the field. That's the mentality that DeVondre Campbell had. And you know what? While so many other things happen on the team, while players are playing with messed up obliques like Nick Bosa, while players are playing after losing a child like Charvarius Ward and Trent Williams, while players are trying to rush back onto the field like Dre Greenlaw with a ruptured Achilles and comes back after 10 months, while players are playing with a broken hand like Talanoa Hufanga, who had a club, while players are playing with a fractured ankle like Fred Warner, you have a guy like DeVondre Campbell who's not playing because his feelings were hurt, because he wasn't starting. That's unacceptable. DeVondre Campbell should not play again in the NFL ever. That's my stance on that. You know what? He should not play again because he showed who he is. Now, people make mistakes. Absolutely. You want to be forgiving of that. But the reality is this isn't the first time DeVondre Campbell has slighted his team. After he was signed by the 49ers, he tweeted this out, that basically Green Bay underutilized him. It was a bad environment and trashed his team. And that should have been a red flag after the 49ers signed him, or they should have looked at his history, checked with previous teammates, anything like that, to check on his character. But clearly he was throwing the other team under the bus because he didn't get the playing time he wanted. He wasn't the starter anymore. And so that should have shown you that if that same scenario happens again, which it was going to, because everybody knew Greenlaw was coming back, that's the Campbell you would have gotten, and that's exactly who they got on national stage, which is quite fitting considering how the 49ers year went. But DeVondre Campbell should be, my guess what will happen is he'll probably get several fines, conduct detrimental to the team, where maybe the 49ers can recoup some of that money back. But also he'll eventually get released. And then probably never play in the league again. He's 31 years old. He's slow. He's an aging linebacker, not who he once was. Maybe a desperate team will take him. Who knows? But the reality is, you heard from all the 49ers captains and starters that is not acceptable in this league. That is not. For you to dress out, you're saying, I am willing to go on the line and play. If you're dressing out, you're saying, I'm healthy enough to play. And what other paychecks are you robbing from other people? Because if you weren't going to play, tell the coaches beforehand so they can activate another linebacker to play in that game and then help provide for their family. What you said, DeVondre Campbell, was, my money is more important to me. I know I'm not going to play, but I'm going to prevent somebody else from providing for their family by still dressing out so they can't activate another player in my stead and have them play. That's what you said. You took money from the team, but you took money from another one of your comrades. And for that, I don't think any team should take a chance on you in the future. Your career should be done, and that's that. And that's all I have to say about DeVondre Campbell. And I'm sure other people will have things to say about him, but you know what? It's one of those things that you never do. Yes, there's always three sides of the story. There's his side, her side, and then there's the truth. But the reality is, your actions on the national stage show that you were not the mature person in the scenario, and you let your team down. You let your team down, you let yourself down, you let the future down, and what's going to happen is years down the road, you're going to live with regret because you did that and you quit on your team. It's one thing if you did that during the week. It's one thing if you did that at the end of the season, but to do it mid-game, in the middle of a battle where your team's vying for playoff opportunity, you decided to sit down and sit out. So it's unfortunate. Special teams, let's talk about special teams. Special teams, for the most part, didn't shoot themselves in the foot other than illegal formation, but they didn't cough the ball up. They didn't give up any big returns. Jake Moody made his field goals, did his job. He was locked in. It was just Debo who wasn't locked in. But all in all, the 49ers should have won this game. You look at the defense, there were potentially three dropped interceptions. Talanoa Hufanga, he does get a pass. He was playing with the club. If he didn't have that club, he would have had the pick. You had Deommodore Lenoir, who had a potential pick six in the first quarter that went right through his hands. Talanoa Hufanga had another one where he jumped simultaneously with Charvarius Ward. If he would have stayed on the ground, he would have had the deflection. But not just that, the 49ers just squandered opportunities. I think Brock Purdy, if we want to jump to Brock Purdy, proved a couple things. Brock Purdy, I think, is still a franchise quarterback. I don't think you can question what he's done for this team, and he is capable of winning and getting the team to the Super Bowl. I think that is very clear. What I want to call out is I think this year has made it clear that Brock Purdy should not be paid $50+ million a year. Even if that's what the market is for elite quarterbacks, his market should be somewhere around the Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith area, where he gets paid a decent salary between $30 and $40 million a year. I tweeted that his cap should be $42 million. You should pay him anywhere between 35 and 42, which account for the cap going up, which means 30 to 35 this year would be 35 to 42 next year. And so when you talk about percentage of salary to the overall cap, that should be where he's at, between 35 to 42 million. And that way you could still build a good team around him. We know that Brock Purdy is successful when he has good players around him. And you can't have that if he's getting paid $60 million a year. He needs a good offensive line. One of the things that makes Brock Purdy so good is he's able to dissect the defense and make a quick read. The problem is, if he doesn't have time to do that, if he doesn't have the players that can get open in time, then it's not going to matter. He can run the offense well, but he can't run it to the point where he's going to elevate players that aren't as good. He's going to elevate the system because he's a very good decision maker, but if he doesn't have the players in place he's going to have a difficult time. And so essentially what needs to happen is that he needs to get paid around $35 to $42 million a year. That's what he needs to get paid. And that way he can, you can continue building the team around him. They can rebuild that defensive line. They can invest in a right tackle and honestly a center because he needs that. And then hopefully they'll be able to go back and be the 49ers they once were. If you look at the Eagles, they were atrocious the following year. They barely make it in the playoffs, had a first-round exit. This is very similar to that. It is not uncommon for the Super Bowl loser to miss the playoffs the next year. And I think this is exactly it. They've had a lot of wear and tear on their bodies. You have Christian McCaffrey, who's still out, Trent Williams, who's still out. And I think what's going to happen is the 49ers will look to retool, not rebuild, but retool, rebuild that defensive line, and we'll be back in the conversation as one of the best teams in the NFC again. But there's a lot that needs to happen here. Another thing that was surprising is Jauan Jennings was surprisingly not effective in this game. He had 2 drop passes and just seemed to have a rough time in the rain. And so, which is interesting. I think we'll just call that the exception and not the rule because Jauan is usually, we call him Third and Jauan for a reason because he's reliable. Didn't have as great of a game. But I think the biggest fault here, if you're going to pull out 2 things, DeVondre Campbell, what he did was atrocious, but Kyle Shanahan staying away from George Kittle, your future Hall of Famer, and targeting him the same amount of times as Debo was just highway robbery. In a game you needed to win, Kittle should have been the focal point in this game. When you targeted him in the middle and Brock Purdy hit him, he just lit up the defense. George Kittle was all over it. They could not stop him. So I think that was poor decision by Kyle Shanahan, but Kyle needs to learn from this. And let's be honest, Kittle doesn't have many years left playing at an elite level. The way he plays the game, how he run blocks, how he runs his routes, how he's all out all the time, you got maybe 2 to 3 years of elite George Kittle left. And the fact that you're blowing a potential Super Bowl window for one of the icons of your team, the faces of your team, he could potentially be a future, Frank Gore, Justin Smith, Patrick Willis, where they don't actually get a ring. And you don't want that for Kittle. You want to get a ring on his hand. You want to get a ring on Trent Williams' hand. You want to get a ring on Fred Warner's hand. You want to get that taken care of. But the only way to do that is, Kyle, you got to evolve as a coach. You got to realize that there's certain things you got to cut. You got to cut Kyle Juszczyk, got to cut Deebo Samuel. You got to move on from some of these aging players. Leonard Floyd probably shouldn't be back. He's aging. You need to get younger. If you're going to be effective, you want to continue to rebuild this team and redo the identity, and you need to do that. Honestly, Nick Sorensen, as good as he coached this game, he probably needs to be gone. There's nothing exotic about his play calling. So you need to see about bringing Robert Saleh back to get that defensive mentality back. We know Robert Saleh has a good coaching tree already. We see the effects with DeMeco Ryans. So when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, he knows how to coach and train other people. Bring him back. Get that back. Get that energy back. And I think the 49ers will make some noise next year. But you need to take care of what you need to take care of, Kyle. Own the team and honestly bring in an offensive coordinator. They can run your system, but it's time for you to focus on the management side because your record, I believe it's 16-30 when it comes to games decided by 7 points, which means you're a 388 average, which means under 40% when it comes to games decided by 7 points. That's an area you need to improve on as a head coach. That comes down to game management and putting your players in the right position. And that might mean you need to get an offensive coordinator to help you continue to develop. And I think you can do it. I have all the faith in the world in you, but you need to make those moves. And I think the sky's the limit for this team. Well, that's all we got on today's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.